Hi everyone, welcome back to another vector illustration tutorial. This is the last episode of a small 3-video series focused on character design. The first video explained the process of defining your character. In the second, we had a look at giving more complexity and depth through shading. And today, we're going to learn how to design the background. Character design is so much fun, but it is only after you build their world that your character's story is complete. Here is my mood board. Can you guess where my references are from? My inspiration for this scene would be pastel cities with neon lights from the 80s and the 90s anime, like Sailor Moon and Cardcaptor Sakura. I really love their aesthetic and I want to capture that in my illustration. For now, Jocasta is sort of floating in this dark blue void, but let's fix that by going back to the drawing board. So, as you've seen in my previous videos, I like to do all my sketching in Procreate. Going back to our first lesson about character design, you need to ground your characters in a deeper story that meets the eye. From when they are born, to where they live, what job they have, up to what their favorite food is. It's key to think of all these details when designing your character. And probably it's even more important to manifest your story in their environment, rather than just having it in your mind. For example, we already know that Jocasta is a teenage girl with superpowers, but what I know as their creator is that she lives in the future, in a busy city where she has to wait for public transport every evening to go back home. You can tell by this little detail here. The bus stop sign is actually a space shuttle. Every nook and cranny of your canvas can tell your story, so take advantage of that. The time of the day is also a great way to set the mood. For this scene, I choose early evening. I think it fits with the way both Jocasta and her ghost friend feel right now. First thing I do on Vectornator is to import my background sketch into a new layer. I have Jocasta here on a different layer, and I'm going to try and position her on the side following the rule of thirds. Then I'll hide her layer, lock the sketch layer, and create a new one where my vector art will take shape. Now, let's focus on the colors that I'm using, another important aspect that can tell more about your character's story. I have picked very similar colors to the ones that I use for Jocasta. So, if we recap, this world is in the future, it's filled with magic, and it's also inspired by Sailor Moon. No shock here that I've chosen neons, pastels, pinks and greens, anything but dull. There are two ways of designing a background, using perspective or layering your landscape. Today we are focusing on the layering technique. From front to back, so from the closest to the farthest, the layers are Jocasta and the ghost, followed by the bus stop and the railway, then it's the first row of buildings, followed by the second, and the very last layer is the sky with the moon and clouds. We start from the furthest layer and we slowly build the city towards the main subject. In the back, I create a big purple square with the shape tool. To convey the after the sunset mood, I create a dark blue gradient that fills in the top right corner. And a bright orange gradient in the opposite corner. Moving on to the second row of buildings, I start off with simple geometric shapes in a light shade of blue. As you can see, I make a lot of use of the shape tool and use different shades of blue to define the faces of the buildings. To separate the rows of buildings in the background even more, I add a layer gradient at the base of the buildings to simulate the city's fog. Bear in mind that the closer you get, the darker and more detailed the objects will be. So, in the first row of buildings, I am going to add all sorts of details like windows, lights, or billboards. Like this cooler one I'm adding on the right with freehand brushstrokes. While the previous row of buildings is going to remain a cluster of minimal rectangles with very little windows. A tip to add multiple windows to the building is to select multiple objects with the Select tool and duplicate them in sequence. Moving on to the details in the sky, I am adding a few clouds and the moon. For the clouds, I'm playing around with the brush tool settings. By changing the pressure, the line can go from very thin to very chunky in a single stroke. As for the moon, I simply use two circles and use the Boolean function to cut a perfect semi-crescent moon. I find the shape really beautiful. And don't forget to add some stars! It's finally time to add the shuttle in the bus stop sign, such a fun detail. To do this, I simply use the iconator on the right side panel and look for the right icon to add to my design. Just like magic, you can add any icon to your vector illustrations, no sweat. Don't you also get this crazy satisfaction when you're adding the very last details of your illustration and suddenly everything looks a million times better? Speaking of details, I will finish off by adding some circles of light to give a sparkling effect to the distant city. I use the Shape tool for the circles, of course, and then I play with the gradient function in the Style tab to give it a nicer effect. And finally, I go to the Blend mode and choose Overlay. Just to add a bit more movement to the illustration, I add a final layer of particle lights that cross the scene. With the brush tool, I take very little strokes filled with the same circular gradient and then set the blending mode to overlay again. And with that, we are finally finished with this entire illustration, A to Z. Illustrating something digitally can be a complex process, especially when using vectors, but I hope that you were able to follow this series along in order to give life to your imagination. Next video, we will talk about poses and movement, so I'll see you guys then. Be sure to subscribe so you won't miss the notification. Bye!